Alright, tier list time. So I played a game the other day and I got Compass of Gargana from Time of Legends, and it got me thinking like what would be the best and worst cards to get from Time of Legends considering you didn't already have that legendary in your deck. So that's the topic of today's video. So if you don't know what Time of Legends is, it's a legendary card that lets you draw your legendary from your deck. So it's a tutor card basically. And if you don't have a legendary in your deck to draw, then it chooses a random legendary and adds it to your hand and makes it wild. So technically, you should be able to play any legendary you get from this card, unless you're like doing neutral rush or something. In that case, you wouldn't really run it anyway. But the tier list today is going to be how strong would a specific card be if you're not already running that legendary card in your deck. Okay, so first one, Aurora Mythmaker, easily S tier. I think the only reason you wouldn't like this card is if all your creatures had high stats, which is very unlikely. Like, you're going to have a small collector like a Farm Boy or a Mind-Map Dealer in your deck, so it's useful in pretty much any deck. So second card is Aurora's Dream. I'd say this is probably unplayable, right? Because if you're not running a deck that is playing around Aurora's Dream, it's not going to be useful at all. You're never going to get to the point where you're holding 24 Feria. The only reason you would ever want to play this card is if you're making a deck that's based around this card anyway. So yeah, Azurai probably it's probably C tier. I think the gift isn't very useful in a lot of situations, but it's not it's not like a awful card. I mean, there's better dragons you can get from Time of Legends for sure. Beirut, again, it's probably either C or B, right? I mean, if you're playing blue, then it's probably A tier, but in general, I'd say it's B. The only downside is like if you manage to transform some of your lands into lakes, like you don't really want that to happen. But if you don't need the lands and your opponent needs the lands, then this card can be really good in some situations. And also the stat line is not bad either. It's a pretty decent stat line. Dorian, I'd say it's probably A tier, right? If you have a deck that can get to 5 lands, then it's A tier. If you have like a deck that's like only needs 3 or 4 lands, it's not that difficult to get to 5 lands anyway to play this card. It's only 5 Fairy, so it's not really extremely expensive, like compared to Beirut and Azurai and Aurora's Dream, definitely. And it's got a really nice corrupt, so it's a decent card to play, even if you don't get the corrupt off, to be honest. So Bannon is probably D tier. It's changed now. It's 5/5, right? Since this card got released. I mean, it really depends when you get this card. Like if you get it like when you only have like 10 or 9 cards left, it could be kind of playable if you've been counting what you have in your deck. If you get it like at the start of the game, it's probably unplayable, right? So it's like very low D tier, probably like the lowest D tier or like high unplayable. Baron Fogler, probably, let's say C. It really depends on what you're running. I mean, some decks are going to favor this more than other decks. Stat line isn't great. If you manage to get like a lucky 0 cost, it can be quite good, but in general, it's going to just be okay, right? Captain, let's say B or A tier, right? This has changed also to be a 3/8. So it's kind of like a cheap deep with Grizzly if you don't care about the combat. But usually you can get the combat off twice, and if not, yeah, the opponent's usually spending more than the value of the card anyway to get rid of it. Like Choking Sands is probably the most efficient way to get rid of this card, but apart from that, they're usually losing value. Okay, Celeste is probably unplayable. Again, like maybe if it's in like the last 10 cards of your deck, you could maybe play it, but it's not as in this case, it's like less playable than Bannon, because I think the Bannon's condition is a bit easier to get. Compass of Gargana. Low D. If you get it early on, it's okay. Like if you get it like turn 1, turn 2, If you're getting like halfway through the game, it's definitely unplayable. Just for the fact that you're spending one Faria to make a structure which is probably going to get traded at some point or easily. And if you're not running treasures in your deck, like if you're running treasures in your deck, then you'll be running Compass anyway. And if you're not, you don't really want the Compass because it doesn't really do anything for like 6 turns, right? Because it has to put a treasure map into your deck, and then it has to take it to the top of your deck, and then it has to do that another 3 times for you to get the payoff. And it's a bit too slow, even if it's only one Faria. Day of the Dragons, again, probably unplayable. Is it more unplayable than Aurora's Dream? Maybe not as unplayable, but still pretty bad. I mean, you don't really want to put this card in your deck anyway, so like by default, it's just unplayable. Doomgate, probably D tier, right? Unless you're running Swarm, you don't really want to sacrifice your creatures to get draw. But the draw mechanic is quite nice, but you have to sacrifice some creatures. So it's not that great if you have like if you're playing like green or like something with like a deck which has creatures with a lot of stats in it. So yeah, it's only really Swarm that benefits from this, and obviously the decks that would already run this card, like green yellow sack. Chaos, maybe B tier, maybe slightly above Beirut. The ability is really nice. It is pretty usable in any situation you have, unless like it's OTK or something like that. Or I say when you're playing against OTK. It's just a little bit higher land cost, so decks are only using like 3 or 4 lands. It will take a little bit longer to get to, but it's not impossible, so it's not that bad. Eredin, I think probably is either high B tier. I think it's higher than Chaos. It's got a lower land count, which is okay. You can use it to collect for a little bit and then trigger the ability. The ability is probably, I would say, probably on par with Chaos. Maybe slightly worse, but it has a lower land cost, which is why it's probably better to get. This one definitely unplayable. I think I've never seen anyone play this card if they're not already running treasures. But the thing is, like, even if you're running treasures, this card isn't good. Because it dies so easily to removal. The buff it gets is not really that good. It's only 3/3, so it's not amazing. You can maybe, like, you'd have to, like, hold it in your hand until you know you're going to get a treasure and then play it. But then at the same time, it's still not great. Like, hard removal gets rid of this pretty easily. And yeah. Ooh. Is this S tier Fugoro or A tier? I think probably the only problem again is the high land cost. But it is a very versatile card. Like in blue, you're pretty much going to run it in every single deck if you have like the water elemental. Like the Urna Gabriel is so good, and then you get like Crystal Dragon as well. Like a medallion is more specific, but just the Urn and the Crystal Dragon is really useful for pretty much any deck. Gargana probably B tier. Like all cards being wild in your hand can be quite useful, even for decks. Not necessarily for monocolored decks, but like duocolored decks is quite useful because then you don't have to worry about land placement too much. And you can play a lot more, you're a lot more flexible with your lines. But also you get a Gargana crew member, which can be quite good as well. And it's free, so it's basically you get to play this card and a collector, essentially. Gargana Treasure Seeker, probably C, low C tier. It's an okay card. If you have more than 3 cards in your hand, it's like guaranteed, well, not guaranteed treasure, but at least you have enough treasure maps to get a treasure if you draw enough. Stat line isn't too good for a 3/7, but it is flying, so you can let it collect for you. if you really need it to. But you're not really going to use this to make any trades. Garadan, A tier for sure. Could be S tier, really. Like, it doesn't deal 3 damage anymore, it deals 2 damage, but it's still pretty good. You can kind of bait your opponent into playing more stuff on board and then drop it down for like maximum value. And that way it's a really strong card to have, especially if you're not running it in your deck and the opponent doesn't expect you to have Garadan. Then in that case, like in that sense, it's like really good, right? I don't think Goki is a card that you can get from Time of Legends, but if you could, it's actually not unplayable, right? It's like kind of like D tier, right? It's only because the reason is it's only 2 Feria and it's a 2/4, so it's like kind of like Ulani in that sense. So it can be used as like a really cheap collector, and which can't get like flame bursts. So it's actually not that bad, but I don't think it can be. I don't think you can get this actually from Time of Legends. Ignis, C tier. I think probably more useful than Treasure Seeker, but it's very expensive, and to get the most out of it, you need to use your Power Wheel to +1. So it kind of favors decks that can draw a lot, but if you need that Power Wheel for drawing, then it's not that useful. Iona probably S tier as well, in terms of the fact that it's a collector and it's flying. It's a cheap flying collector, which is always useful in every kind of deck. You just like if you're a deck that like tempos to one side, and then you just have like Iona going to the other side to collect while your enemy's trying to protect his face, gives you a lot of value. Stanu, let's say C. Expensive in terms of land cost as well. Slightly more useful because it has charge free, so you can make a few good trades if you can see them. If you have like a lot of small collectors, it's also very good. So again, for Swarm, it's quite nice. But sometimes you will have cards on your board that you don't want dying. So in that sense, it's not great, but it isn't like useless. I'd say Junk Feet is Junk Feet is definitely unplayable. I would say even more unplayable. Maybe even not more unplayable than Figaro, because you can at least collect for 4 turns if you do want to play it. But yeah, if you're not running mechs, this is a useless card. And if you're running mechs, you would probably have this in your deck anyway. Chaos D tier. If you can get the Corrupt off, it's quite cool, but sometimes you're sacrificing a lot for the Corrupt. If you can get like one single trade off of it, it's like an okay value card because it's like 6/6 or 6 Feria. High land cost though. It's not an amazing Corrupt. Like draining 1 life from everything can be detrimental for you if you have like some cards that are on 1 life, but definitely not unplayable like the other ones are. Gleam, probably A tier, right? It's like so strong. It's flying as well with charge 2, so it can do the classic double collect while still being like in threat range of a lot of the board. Also, the combat when it attacks a god is pretty useful. Having 0 cost Kaleem's follower is not a bad thing necessarily unless you're playing against burn. So I'd say it's a pretty decent card to get. And Krog is difficult because the combat is so good, right? If you can get it off. If you're playing a deck with low Feria cost, it's not great. The only problem is like it's so expensive to get. Like getting to 12 Feria can be quite difficult for some decks, and also does get countered by a few things like Transform and Choking Sands. So in that case, like you would have Krog's Dinner to kind of, well, for Choking Sand and like removal, you have the Krog's Dinner, but if you're playing Time of Legends, you're not going to be having the dinner with it. So probably C tier. Actually, I'd probably say lower, like, I don't know, here. Maybe it's here, actually. Leia, S tier as well. Very versatile card. Like you see it in a lot of decks that need some sort of removal that they don't have. So yeah, it's like a very well-rounded card. Death Touch, and is also free attack, so it can't get Empress Commanded. It can't be tricked unless you use like another card for it as well. So yeah, decent. Magda, it's probably C, right? I mean, it's kind of the same issue with Time of Legends. Like, it gives you a random legend, right? But it does make it cost one less. But if you get like a bricked card like Aurora's Dream or like Junk Feet, then you're kind of in trouble because you're taking up hand space that you could be using for something else. But it can just stay as a collector. Sometimes you can roll something really good, so it's not horrible. Magnus, probably the same section as Krog, right? A bit more versatile though, because you're drawing the card, you're not reducing one in your hand, so it's a bit better. It's just very expensive, and sometimes you're not going to be getting a lot of value from it if you have like cheap cards. But I think it's better than some of these ones actually. I think it's probably better than Azurai actually. I say it's probably the top here. I put Azurai behind Baron Fugler, I guess. Oh, Maginata is quite a good card. Only 5 lands, so it's like pretty possible to build towards it. 10 Feria is expensive, but it does give you a huge payoff. So I'm saying it's probably top of B tier, right? I think it's top of B tier. Oh, Moby. Okay, so this is a very controversial one because it's really good if you can get it off, but 8 lands is so much for something that doesn't have ramp, right? You're going to be spending like for most decks you're going to be spending like 4 turns of not drawing. That can kill a lot of decks. So I don't know if I should put it in the middle of C tier. Like if you can get the lands off, then it's great, but if you're not running ramp, then it's not great. And if you're running ramp, you're probably running this card anyway. This is unplayable if you're not running Yax or Bargain with Magnus or Aurora's Dream. You only put this card in the deck if you actually have a deck that plays around it, right? So if you get this card from Time of Legends, it's completely useless. Probably more useless than Fugoro because it's not worth 15 Feria, like the payoff. So if you can't reduce it in any way, then you're screwed. Orosei is an unplayable card in general, even if you do decide to put it in your deck. Like, there's so many things that can go wrong with this gift that it's not even worth playing it in any deck. Like, a classic example is like when you have a 7 cost card and then it transforms into something stupid like a Red Devil where the gift really makes up half the card, right? So yeah, in that sense, it's unplayable. Radiance C. It really depends, right? If you're like behind, it can be A tier. But if you're like even and like no one has hit face or anything, then it's unplayable, right? Because it's not worth 20 Feria. So I'm gonna have to put it right in the middle there, in the middle of C tier. Right. The other Steve. This is a more flexible card because it doesn't require as much Feria. Because the ability is so specific, it's not usually useful in a lot of cases. Probably, but I'd say in general, probably more playable than the Radiance Imperial Airship. So I'm going to put it at high C tier. Rapala, A tier. It's like a really fancy ruby fish, right? Usually you're going to be having 4 lands, so it's not that expensive land cost wise. The ability is kind of okay. Some people think that it's a bit too overpowered, but honestly, like milling a card is not that bad. It's only bad if it's like a specific answer that you really needed that turn, but most of the time it's not going to be the case. It's just that it's a cheap 1-cost collector. Actually, because it's aquatic, it's probably not going to be that good. Yeah, I forgot that's aquatic. So in that case, probably B tier. Like, you would have to make a lake for it, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a horrible card if you can get it to collect out of aggression. Definitely more playable than the other cards here in C tier. Runin is not... I'll say super low D tier. So, like, you could consider this being unplayable if you're not playing green, because when it dies, it will return to your hand as free forest instead of free wild. So in that sense, like you could consider it being unplayable. But if you're playing green, then it's okay, and it can be used as like a little bit of tempo if you want to block something. But yeah, it's still a really bad card. I'm not saying like it's good in any sense, but it's not unplayable like Aurora's Dream is unplayable. Cypher, probably B or A tier. Super good stats. Only 3 lands as well, so no trouble getting to that. And the ability is quite useful. The enemy would have to have some sort of removal and card that can trade with it. And even then, he's still going to be giving you a bit of value. Shara, yeah, it's like 9 times out of 10 unplayable, right? Or like if you can play it, like the only way you can play this if you're playing against green with high stats, then it could be okay. But like literally every other color has a way to deal with this. Like if it's Battletoads or like Ninja Toad, Flame Burst, even like double Soul Drain is worth it. So I would say unplayable. Like 9 times out of 10 it's unplayable. So I'd put it like between the top of unplayable. Chosen, I'd say probably C, right? It's 6 Feria for 6/6 stats and then possibly another creature as well. Solemn, unplayable. This card is unplayable in general anyway. I've never seen anyone utilize this card effectively in a deck. So yeah, definitely not something you're going to be playing anytime soon. Socorro, D, somewhere in D tier. Like top of D tier. The fact that it turns wild is quite decent actually, because the biggest trouble with this card is that the land requirements for it doesn't really synergize well with any kind of other cards in the same color pool. So making it wild makes it a little bit more flexible. I would even put this like C tier above the Gargano Treasure Seeker. It's only like 1 fairy more, right? And the stats are way better, and it's got a better ability as well. Okay, need to zoom out a little bit. There we go. Tarim, D tier or low C tier? It's probably D tier, right? Because it's 15 fairy. It's kind of too much. The Last Words isn't great either if you're not playing green, and even if you're playing green, it only really favors Oakfather, so really doesn't have a lot of uses here. Is it better than Bannon though? Probably. Oh, it's somewhere around there. Tephra, I can see it quite easily being an A tier. Like in the middle of A tier, I'd say, because the gift is really useful. 6/6 flying is also pretty good. It's a decent card. Like you can use it in pretty much any deck as well. That's like the main factor for something being an A tier. Tree of Everlife, I'd say unplayable if you're not already running it in the deck. The land cost is way too high, and then by the time you get into that land cost, if you're doing it naturally and not through ramp, even with ramp it's still pretty difficult. You'd have to have like super ramp like Blossoming Kodama or something. Even if you get to that land cost, by the time you get into 10 lands, your opponent is probably already at your face if you're not drawing. So yeah, Time of Legends, I don't think you can get Time of Legends from Time of Legends, so that's fine. If you did, then it would be unplayable. Well, no, actually not unplayable, but like just really bad, right? Ulani, say unplayable as well. Since if you're not running this in a multicolour deck, yeah, if you're running a deck that has all 4 colours, you're probably wanting this card anyway, so yeah. And if you're not, then you're not going to be drawing as many cards as you can. This Ulani is, let's say, high B tier, maybe A tier. Depending on what your board state's like, obviously, the condition is quite specific, but even if you don't get the condition, it's still pretty good. So maybe like B tier, let's not say A tier. Just as a collector, right? Same idea as Goki. But sometimes you're going to be able to get that ability off and it's going to be really, really good for you. Okay, so that's it. That's the tier list. Thank you very much for watching.